Welcome Algebra 1, this is section 5.4, PointSlope Form. The essential question is, why do we call it PointSlope Form? So this section of notes, we did a bunch of different equations of linear forms. Last one we did slope-intercept form. This one is now PointSlope Form. What is PointSlope Form? Well, this is the formula for PointSlope Form. So y minus y sub 1 equals m times the quantity x minus x sub 1. Your m is your slope, just like in the last equation. M is always going to be slope. And your x1 and y1, there's some x value and y value of a point. And note, it can be any point on that line, but it must be the same point for the x1 and y1. You can't choose one x from one point and a y from a different point. It must be the same point. So like a point in the ordered form x sub 1, y sub 1. It'll look like it's in that format and you plug them in. So what does that look like? Let's try to write an equation in point slope form. So I got a line graphed right here, and I got a bunch of different points here. And I want to write this equation in point slope form. So the slope, I said, is 2 over 3. So we know my m is 2 over 3, and I get to pick one value, one of these points here. Let's pick this top one first, 3, 5. So I'm going to say my x sub 1 equals 3, and that's my y sub 1 will equal 5. So if I'm plugging them into this equation, it is going to be y minus y sub 1, so y minus 5 equals m, so 2/3, times the quantity x minus x sub 1, which is 3. So this would be that equation in point slope form. I can choose any point, and note, I can choose a different point to make an equation that line. I can take the point down here. I'll do that one in red. So for this one, my x sub 1 would be -6, and my y sub 1 would be -1. If you plug that into the equation, you can get y minus y sub 1, so -1, equals m, so 2/3, times x minus -6. Now, minus negatives, we can change that to a positive, so it's y plus 1 equals 2/3 times x plus 6. Note, these are two different equations. They look different, but they are both equations for this line here. They both work out. So there's not just one equation that'll work. There's an infinite number, because any point on the graph would work for this equation. All right, so let's graph an equation that's a point from an equation in point slope form. So here's my example right here, and I see it as 3 steps. So the first step, 1, 2, 3 right here, is to find the m, x sub 1, and y sub 1. Looking at my equation, my m is going to be 2/3, and your x sub 1 and y sub 1. Notice this says, so your x sub 1, notice it says -2. That doesn't mean you put -2, because the formula is minus the x sub 1. You have to do the opposite number. So if it says -2, do the opposite and do +2. When it says -1, do the opposite and do +1. So for x sub 1 and y sub 1, think the opposite every time. So if this was x plus 2, you would have put -2 there. So you have to think the opposite for x sub 1 and y sub 1. All right, now that I got those, let's plot x sub 1, y sub 1. And so that means I'm plotting the point 2, 1. So point 2, 1 would be 2 over, 1 up. It looks like it's right there, and I'm going to label this 2, 1. All right, so done. Now the next thing, I got to use the slope to plot a second point. So you're going to start with the first point I plotted. Don't just start the y-axis. Start right here, and the rise over run is going to be rise of 2 and a run of 3. So I go up 2, 1, 2, and I run 3, 1, 2, 3. So it goes right here. And that's my second point. I'm going to label that point. It's at 5, 3. Now I got 2 points. We're going to graph a perfectly straight line between those 2 points. So a perfectly straight line is going to look something like, oops, that's not going to work for me. So it's going to look something like this. Again, use a straight edge like a ruler or your ID, and make sure you put the arrowheads on both sides to indicate it keeps going on forever. So that's the graph. All right, let's look at some examples. So pause the video. All right, let's begin. A line passes through -3, 6 and has a slope of -5. What is an equation of that line? So I have a point right here, and I have a slope. So the first thing to write an equation, if I have a point and a slope, I can use the point slope form. Because my slope's -5, that means my m is going to be -5. Because I have a point on that line, -3, 6, I know that the first one, -3, is going to be my x sub 1. So x sub 1 is -3, and my y sub 1 is going to be +6. So now that I got all 3 of those variables, I can plug it into the equation. It's going to be y minus 6 equals m, so negative 5 times x minus negative 3. And minus a negative 3, I can rewrite that. So y minus 6 times negative 5 times the x plus 3. And that's an equation for that line. Let's try the next one. Pause the video. Okay, graph the equation. So the first thing, I got to figure out my m, my x sub 1, and y sub 1. My m is going to be the coefficient right here, so negative 4/5. My x sub 1 is going to be the opposite of this number here, so it'll be positive 4. And my y sub 1 is going to be the opposite of this number here, so it'll be negative 2. So now that I have those points, the first thing I got to plot the one point I know based off x sub 1 and y sub 1, so I know there's a point negative 2, 4. I'm going to plot that. Negative 2 and up 4 starts right here. I'm going to label it negative 2, 4. Now, do the second point, since my slope is negative 4 over 5, I'm going to go starting at this point, and I'm going to go down 4. So down 1, 2, 3, 4, and then over 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to be this point right here. I'm going to label that. That's at 3, 0. So I got 2 points. I'm going to draw a perfectly straight line between those points. So a perfectly straight line will look something like this, and I can extend that. There I go. And don't forget those arrowheads. And that's it. Label those points. Done.